Welcome to today's Global Connections program. I'm Bill Miller. Today we're going to learn about the Association of Foreign Correspondents and what they do, as well as learning about a very important country located in the Balkans, and that is Greece. My guest today is an expert on both of these entities. My guest today is Thanos Dimadis. Thanos Dimadis was born in Varia, Greece, and raised in Brussels, Belgium. Dimadis is a foreign journalist and a member of the International Federation of Journalists, and he is also the president, and possibly the youngest president, of the Association of Foreign Correspondents in the United States. He is also the author of a book, The Daedalus of the Eurozone Crisis, which we're going to be talking about in just a few moments. Thanos Dimadis, welcome to today's Global Connections program.
Bill, it's good to see you. Thank you for this invitation. I know that you've been doing a tremendous work over the last 13 years. And you have a great experience and a great career, and it is an honor for me to be here in your talk show.
Well, I appreciate that. Thank you. Your check's in the mail. I appreciate that very much. Let's get right into it. You are the president of the Association of Foreign Correspondents. What is this group? What is your goal, your mission? When was it formed? Why was it formed?
Well, I've had the honor to serve and to be appointed as president of the Association of Foreign Correspondents. We are a non-profit independent organization, and our scope and our mission is to represent foreign correspondents based in the United States, not just in New York, but across the country. And when we say foreign correspondents, we mean all the international journalists who are living and working in the United States, and they represent foreign media. One of the major pillars of our mission is also to provide scholarships to international journalists and to encourage those journalists to study in the United States, not necessarily only in journalism, but in other fields that are relevant to their experience, like, for example, finance, MBA program, history, analytics, marketing. And I could say that this mission is very important at this rapidly changing media environment, and we are here to send the message across the media industry in the United States that the foreign correspondents, the foreign journalists, have a strong representation in this country.
Now, you mentioned the foreign journalists in the United States. That's probably a large number. Are all of the members of your group? How large is your organization? And are you a membership group they can join if they would like?
We are a membership organization. Of course, we don't have as members all the foreign correspondents existing in the United States, but our doors are open to everyone who has credentials and who is an active and working foreign journalist being in the United States. I would like to say that it is very important the role of the foreign presenter, which is the foreign presenter is playing here in the United States. We are standing by their work and their mission because it is a governmental agency, but we're in an independent organization. We don't collaborate with any government across the globe, but what we are doing is to create any strategic alliances with other organizations that represent journalists, foreign journalists. We have a great collaboration with the United Nations Correspondents Association, and I would like to say that the foreign presenter of State Department, the officers are doing an incredible job. They support the foreign press, but our mission here is to have a strong, independent voice of representation.
Mm-hmm. And our viewers can go to your website at foreignpresscorrespondence.org and learn much more about this.
Correct, and also to get registered as a member. We have memberships, which are $100 per year for every single journalist. And also someone can donate to our mission, and all the donations are going directly in support of the scholarship awards, which we provide to foreign journalists. And as I said, because education is the epicenter of our mission, and we believe that the foreign journalist working in this country and abroad has to have the educational resources to do and to execute his job in the most efficient way. And also we are here to guarantee that the independence of their reporting, the support that the foreign journalists need to do their reporting and to write their stories, we guarantee that. And we work with foreign journalists coming from across the globe, from different countries, sometimes from authoritarian regimes, sometimes from countries where the freedom of speech and the freedom of press is not taken for granted. I could give as an example, for example, Greece. We here in the United States we enjoy the freedom of the press. There is freedom of press and there are strong institutions, but this is not the case in any single country.
Yeah, that's a very important point. I was going to bring that up a little later in the program, but we may as well just broach it right now. What do you see as some of the major concerns or some of the major threats to the media all around the world? Obviously, it varies from country to country, but are there certain threats out there right now that are gaining momentum that we need to be concerned about?
Oh, well, I see that, and we all see that the rise of authoritarian regimes, the rise of regimes that are attacking and targeting and victimizing journalists. We see these cases also in the United States, but as I said, the institutions here and the media organizations are mostly independent. In other countries, like in Europe or in China or in Turkey or in Latin America, there are cases, or in Russia, there are cases where journalists are victimized and targeted by the regimes. And we see a general trend where journalists are being the target of any political regime that want to create political game by attacking journalists. And we have to understand here that journalists and the journalism as a mission is the cornerstone of our democracy. When we attack journalists, that means that we hurt our democracy. And in countries where the democratic institutions are not strong enough, journalists are more victimized and are not in a strong position to defend themselves. And that's why I think we have an obligation as a community of journalists across the globe to work together in a unified way to protect the journalists. And also there are organizations like the Committee to Protect Journalists which is doing a tremendous work, and we have to recognize that.
And for years, in not most countries, but a large number of countries, journalists were viewed as independent, they were viewed as legitimate, they were viewed as providing basic information to the populace to help people better understand issues. But it is getting much more difficult and more dangerous to be a journalist today in just, I'm not going to say every country in the world, but a large number of them, but it's certainly moving in that direction.
Yes, and I was recently reading a report according to which almost 9 journalists every month across the globe are killed, and most of them are local journalists. We're not just talking about the foreign correspondents who are on the battlefield of covering wars, on the war zones, but we're talking about local journalists in several countries where they don't have the protection from the governments themselves. They don't have the protection from the system in these countries to be able to freely share their stories and to inform the public about several cases that are public cases, they are public affairs, and that's a scary situation. And I can say that there are not only the way that how you victimize the journalists, it's not just the governments that don't support the independence of the press. There are governments, and I would say that this was the case the last 4 years and a half in Greece, where the government was using the public state media to diffuse stories, fake news stories against its political opponents, against journalists who were not supportive of their policies, of the government's policies. And these are situations which are very concerning and are relevant to what is the level of our democracy and how we can secure that the democratic institutions work in each of these countries.
And it's absolutely essential that they work. It's very important. It's very important that they work. Why don't we shift over to specific examples and look at 3 generic areas. One is peace and security. Now, I know the people who are members of your organization are covering every issue imaginable from a variety of different perspectives, but are there one or two issues in the peace and security area that come to the surface that really are riveting, most of your people are covering or very interested in?
Well, we have members who are credentialed journalists based in the US. Our Vice President, Suzanne Modares, is a credentialed journalist here in the UN. And like most of the people covering the UN-related matters, the issues that are related to peace and security are on the top of their agenda. I think that the journalists covering these issues, particularly from the standpoint of the United Nations, are so important to spread the word about the role of the United Nations in any single region across the globe. And the work that the United Nations produce is so important, and we need to have a strong, legit representation of those people who are covering these stories. And we have members based in the UN, but also we are not only focusing on these matters. We're also focusing on matters. For example, we are developing an LGBTQ program for LGBTQ journalists coming from countries where the LGBTQ community is not acceptable. So we need to make sure that those people are having access to the rights that they deserve as human beings.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned the various issues that are being really covered at the United Nations, and it's very true. They deal with everything. You name it, peace and security, looking at the issues in the Middle East with Yemen, with all the Palestinians, the Israelis, just on across the board in the area of economic and social development, programs dealing with eliminating polio, for example, working with Rotary International to eliminate the scourge of polio. In the area of human rights, we were talking about the human rights for journalists, but also for people who are involved as migrants or people who are refugees. But so many of these issues do not get covered. They just don't get out, and that's why it's so critical to have people such as your journalists who are covering these issues and helping to bring us up to date on what is going on. Well, you're watching Global Connections Television, which is a privately funded, independently produced program. The opinions expressed on Global Connections are solely those of the moderator and his guest. We'd invite our viewers to go to our website at www.globalconnectionstelevision.com to view previous programs. Also, if you're involved with a media outlet, be it a PBS or community access television station, or perhaps an educational institution that has an intra-campus television hookup, or you just have a website or you just have a computer and you like our programs and you want to share them, please feel free to do so. Global Connections Television is provided at no cost as a public service to help us better understand international issues and how they impact our lives. Today we're talking with Thanos Dimadis, who is bringing us up to date on a very interesting organization and what's going on in the Balkans, which we're going to get to in just a moment. And Thanos is the president of the Association of Foreign Correspondents in the United States. Before we run out of time, I guess we better shift to the Balkans here and start talking. You have written a book on the financial crisis in Greece, I guess is what it is, and it's called The Daedalus of the Eurozone Crisis. It's a fascinating term. Briefly describe what is Daedalus. That's from a Greek mythological figure or situation, but briefly mention what that is, and then what was your book about?
Although we discussed that about what means Daedalus, but let your viewers know that Daedalus is the similar like labyrinth. And when you are in Daedalus, you don't know where is the exit, and you don't know how to find the exit, and you don't know how to find directions towards the exit. And this was the case of the Eurozone, the European financial crisis, and the Greek crisis during the last 4 years. Especially if we talk about the Greek situation, the last 10 years, what we have been experiencing is that we are in a Daedalus, which is we never know where is the end. Greek people get into this crisis since 2010. They have no idea for how long this crisis will last. It is still a long-standing crisis, and we still are in this situation in Greece after 10 years of this horrible experience politically and socially. But when we talk about Daedalus, it means also that there is no any specific recipe of how a country can get back to growth, of how a country can give again the prospect to its young people and to its young generation to get back to work, and how it can create opportunities for developing the economy, and how it can modernize the economy. Because when we talk about the economic crisis, it's not only about numbers. It is not only about what is the growth rate or what is the surplus for the next 10 years, but it is all about how the reforms are needed and how these reforms are going to be implemented, and how you can bring the social consensus internally in the society. Because one of the things that we have been experiencing during the last 4 years is that there has never been consensus, neither from a political side nor from a social standpoint. Now we are going through a process of, after 4 years of a populist government which came into the power promising that, it will stop and it will cancel all the austerity measures, it will bring Greece back to growth. We're in a process of realization about what needs to be happen, and I think that the two key elements that gives the prospect of a positive future in the next years is the fact that populism in Greece was defeated, and also the extreme right-wing party, the neo-Nazi Golden Dawn Party, is also defeated in the recent elections. So these are two positive developments.
Mm-hmm. When you were talking about the labyrinth, it brought to mind about this whole Brexit issue. I know it's a little bit just partially removed from what we're talking about right now, but we saw, I guess it's been about 3 years ago, something like that, there was a vote in the UK, and by 52 to 48%, something like that, they voted to remove the UK from the European Union. So it's Brexit, British exit from the European Union. That has certainly been a labyrinth. There's certainly been no easy answer, and there's no logical path out of that labyrinth. How do you perceive that as someone who lived in that area of the world, who studies that area of the world, and who knows the area of the world?
I would say that the UK has never been in the core of the European project and the European integration. The UK as a country was always with the one foot inside the EU and the other foot outside of the EU. So the fact that the UK decided that it will abandon the European project, of course, it creates a new framework for the European Union itself, but also for the country itself. I don't see how the UK will be able to ensure the economic growth and the stability that it is needed after the complete exit from the European Union. But on the other side, what I see is that other countries which were thinking in a social level the prospect of leaving the EU, now they're considering the aspects of the effects and the impact that this will have for the social cohesion and for the economic growth, because UK is going through a lot of pain politically and socially, and they don't know even themselves how to manage that. We see all this political turmoil during the last 3 years, and the new Prime Minister of the UK hopefully will bring an end with a deal between the UK and the EU, a deal that will work for both sides, but this is something that nobody can predict, and hopefully we will see the EU being in a more accessible way to negotiate with the UK a deal that also will not destabilize the European integration and the European project.
Mm-hmm. And to make it even more challenging, there are parts of the UK, namely Scotland and Northern Ireland, who definitely want to stay as part of the European Union. So that poses even more of a challenge, more of a labyrinth, if we will, to try to extricate one from.
Exactly, and this is also, the European Union always has been going through the process of internal disputes between the member states about what is the right way as a EU that we have to take, to what direction, and how much of European integration we need as a project, as a continent. Now, during the economic crisis, we created a different momentum internally in the European Union. We have the lenders, those countries who take the money, they lend the money, and we have the creditors, the countries who give the money. So this creates a completely new political framework, which is still in a process of evolving, and we don't know to what extent the EU will remain in the same format or the Eurozone in the same format in the next 4 or 5 years. Mm-hmm. Greece is not on the table, but this doesn't mean, for example, that the Greek crisis has been resolved. I don't think that it has been resolved, and I think that we will see a new economic turmoil in Greece because the whole situation is not sustainable from a financial point of view, and this will have an impact also on the Eurozone. And we see what is happening in Italy. We see that the political stability in Italy or in other countries is not to take it for granted.
As we look, you're from the Balkans. Greece is a major country in the Balkans, and we think back to the 90s and the violence that took place in that area. And of course, a lot of that had to do with the breakup of the former Yugoslavia, breaking up, and I think in 6 parts, something like that. As you look at that area of the world, with this ultra-nationalism that's taking place, a resurgence of some neo-Nazi thinking, it's more of an identity, it's almost a radical identity of certain peoples in these various countries. What do you see for the future of that area? Do you see it as getting better, or maybe we can acclimate ourselves to this, or maybe tone down some of this virulent nationalistic talk? How do you perceive it? And I know it may be different from country to country.
I think that, you know, the nationalistic perspective might still exist. For example, internally in the country called North Macedonia, I prefer to keep it still FYROM. The reason is because personally, as a journalist, I don't have something like personal with the nation, and the Greek people don't have a personal issue with a personal dispute with the other nation. It is still an issue of democracy about how you resolve these problems. For example, we know the problem of how the so-called FYROM and the North Macedonia is going to be called, and how the agreement between Greece and North Macedonia took place a few months ago. But the core democratic issue here is how internally in each of these countries we apply fully democracy and democratic processes. For example, in Greece, when we were in the middle of having a public dialogue about how this agreement between Greece and FYROM or North Macedonia will be applied, we never had an open dialogue as a society. The society should be questioned, should be asked its opinion about these matters through a referendum, through an open process of a dialogue internally. This didn't happen. And of course, this creates many other prospects of keeping people not having trust in us, to the political system, to the governments. And this doesn't resolve the problem, because the problem typically can be resolved by an agreement, for example, between FYROM, so-called North Macedonia and Greece, but this doesn't mean that this so-called agreement has been fully adopted and accepted by the people themselves. And I'm not talking about certainly or definitely only from the people perspective of the Greek people, but also on the perspective of the people on the other country. But certainly what I want to see and what I expect to see is that Greece should play a strong geostrategic role in Balkans. And Greece is a very strong country which has alliances with other countries, and I think this is something that also the United States recognize.
Well, in our last 30 seconds, the hardest question, and moving from the Balkans, moving globally, what do you see as the major issue that we're dealing with now or will be dealing with tomorrow that will affect the entire world, or may destabilize it, or maybe make it better?
I think the fact that people don't trust their democratic institutions anymore, they don't trust how the political systems are dealing with the social problems. I think we need a deeper democracy. We don't need necessarily more democracy. We need deeper democracy, and we need to make sure that that countries which are having strong democratic institutions will pave the way. Will make sure that other countries where are dominated by authoritarian regimes, they have to comply with democratic rules and process internally.
That's very true. Thanos Dimadis, you're absolutely right. And democratic institutions are so critical, and we see that they're under siege in, I won't say every country of the world, but a large number of countries that you can look at, from the Philippines to the United States to Hungary on across the board, and they're under siege to some degree. But those are very keen and very thoughtful insights into some very complex issues. And I want to thank you so very much for a very interesting and a very informative program.
Thank you, Bill.
Thank you
for having me.
My pleasure. I'm Bill Miller. Thank you for joining us today on Global Connections Television.